At my college graduation party, my brother Matthew broke down in tears claiming I had been stealing money from his college fund for years, so I played the recording I had made 3 hours earlier predicting his exact manipulation tactics. Let me take you back to when this all started. Matthew and I are twins, born exactly 7 minutes apart, but those 7 minutes might as well have been 7 years for how differently our parents treated us. I came out first, screaming and healthy, while Matthew had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck and needed immediate medical attention. Those first few terrifying minutes of his life somehow became the foundation for the next 22 years of mine. Growing up, Matthew learned early that being the almost lost him child came with privileges. When we were 5 and both wanted the same toy, Mom would gently explain to me that Matthew needed it more because he'd had such a rough start. When we were 10 and both wanted to join Little League, Dad signed Matthew up immediately but told me the family budget was tight. When we were 15 and both applied for our first jobs at the local grocery store, Matthew got hired while I was told they weren't looking for more employees, even though I had better grades and more volunteer experience. The pattern was so consistent that I started to believe it was normal. Matthew was the sensitive one, the one who needed extra support, the one whose feelings mattered more. I was the responsible one, the one who could handle disappointment, the one who should understand that life wasn't fair. What I didn't realize until much later was that Matthew wasn't just the beneficiary of this system, he was its architect. It started small. In middle school, whenever I accomplished something noteworthy, Matthew would develop mysterious ailments that required immediate parental attention. When I made honor roll, he suddenly had severe stomach problems that kept Mom home from my award ceremony. When I won the school science fair, he had a panic attack that sent Dad rushing to pick him up early, missing my presentation entirely. The timing was always perfect, always just coincidental enough to seem innocent. High school was where Matthew really perfected his craft. I remember the day I got accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship. I was so excited that I called Mom immediately from the school counselor's office. She screamed with joy and said she couldn't wait to tell Dad when he got home from work. For exactly 2 hours, I felt like the golden child for once. Then Matthew came home from his friend Tyler's house, took one look at my acceptance letter on the kitchen counter, and within 10 minutes was having what appeared to be a complete emotional breakdown. He sobbed that he was terrified he wouldn't get into any colleges, that everyone expected him to be as smart as me, that the pressure was crushing him. He hyperventilated until Dad had to get a paper bag, and Mom spent the entire evening holding him while he cried about how inadequate he felt. My Northwestern celebration dinner was postponed indefinitely. Instead, we spent the weekend researching therapy options for Matthew's anxiety and looking into less competitive colleges where he might feel more comfortable. My acceptance letter disappeared from the counter, and when I asked about it, Mom said she'd put it away so it wouldn't make Matthew feel worse about himself. That was the moment I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the patterns. Over the next few months, I began documenting Matthew's behavior in a journal I kept hidden in my room. What I discovered was both fascinating and infuriating. Matthew had an uncanny ability to sense when attention was about to shift away from him, and he developed a sophisticated repertoire of responses to redirect it back. If I brought home good grades, Matthew would suddenly remember some traumatic incident from our childhood that he needed to discuss. If I got asked to prom, Matthew would have an anxiety attack about being rejected if he asked anyone. If I got a job, Matthew would become overwhelmed by the pressure to find one too and need extensive emotional support. The timing was never random. It was surgical. College should have been my escape, but Matthew made sure it wasn't. During my freshman year at Northwestern, he'd call home crying whenever I achieved anything worth mentioning. When I made Dean's List, he called sobbing that he was failing chemistry and might have to drop out. When I got an internship at a prestigious marketing firm, he had a breakdown about how he'd never find anything that impressive and maybe college wasn't for him after all. My parents would call me, frantic with worry about Matthew, asking if I could talk to him because I was so good at handling pressure and maybe I could help him cope. Every conversation became about reassuring Matthew, supporting Matthew, making sure Matthew didn't feel overshadowed by his successful twin sister. My accomplishments became secondary to managing his emotional state. Junior year was when I started recording our family phone calls. I told everyone it was for a communications class project about family dynamics, which wasn't entirely a lie. What I captured was hours of evidence showing how every conversation eventually centered on Matthew's needs, his fears, his struggles. Even when my parents called to check on me, Matthew would somehow end up being the primary topic of discussion. The pattern became so predictable that I started a betting pool with my roommate Angela. She'd put $5 on Matthew having a crisis within 24 hours of me sharing good news, and I'd bet it would happen within 12 hours. I won every single time. Angela started calling him the emotional vampire and suggested I write a psychology paper about sibling manipulation tactics. But the real revelation came during Christmas break of my senior year. I was home for 2 weeks, and Matthew was being unusually nice to me. He helped with dishes without being asked, complimented my new haircut, even suggested we watch movies together like we used to when we were kids. I was cautiously optimistic that maybe we were finally growing out of our dysfunctional dynamic. Then I overheard a phone conversation he was having with his girlfriend, Emma. I was in the kitchen getting water when I heard him laughing in the living room. "You should see how easy it is," he was saying. "All I have to do is cry a little bit, and suddenly everything becomes about me again." She thinks she's so smart with her fancy college and her internships, but she has no idea how to compete with good old-fashioned emotional manipulation. Emma laughed and said something I couldn't hear clearly, but Matthew's response was crystal clear. "The best part is that our parents eat it up every time. They're so guilty about my birth complications that they'll believe anything I tell them about struggling or feeling inadequate. I could probably convince them that her success is somehow traumatic for me, and they'd make her apologize for it." That conversation changed everything. It wasn't just that Matthew was manipulative, it was that he was proud of it. He wasn't struggling with genuine emotional issues. He was weaponizing fake ones to maintain his position as the family's primary concern. Every tear, every breakdown, every crisis had been calculated to steal attention away from my achievements and redirect it toward his manufactured problems. I spent the rest of winter break observing Matthew with new eyes, and the performance was flawless. He had perfected the art of appearing vulnerable without actually being vulnerable, of seeming to need help without actually wanting solutions. When our parents offered to get him tutoring for his struggles in school, he'd deflect by saying he didn't want to be a burden. When they suggested therapy for his anxiety, he'd insist that talking to family was more meaningful than talking to strangers. He had created the perfect system. He got all the emotional support and attention he craved, while simultaneously avoiding any real accountability or effort to change. Meanwhile, I had learned to minimize my own accomplishments to avoid triggering his episodes, effectively allowing him to control not just family dynamics but my own relationship with success. That's when I decided to document everything systematically. I started recording our family interactions whenever possible, screenshotting text conversations, and keeping detailed notes about the timing of Matthew's emotional crises relative to my achievements. What I compiled over the next 6 months was a comprehensive case study in psychological manipulation that would have impressed my professors. The opportunity for my ultimate revelation came with my college graduation. I was graduating summa cum laude with a double major in marketing and psychology, and I had already secured a position at a top consulting firm in Chicago. For once, I was determined to have a celebration that would actually be about me, so I planned a graduation party at our house with extended family and friends. 3 hours before the party was scheduled to begin, I locked myself in my childhood bedroom and recorded a video on my phone. In that video, I predicted exactly what Matthew would do to sabotage my day. I explained that he would wait until the party was in full swing, probably right after Dad's speech about how proud he was of both his children. Matthew would then create some kind of emotional crisis designed to shift all attention away from my graduation and onto his manufactured trauma. I predicted that he would either claim I had been cruel to him behind closed doors, accuse me of some form of betrayal that would make our parents question my character, or reveal some fabricated struggle he'd been hiding that would require immediate family intervention. I set the timestamp on the video and sealed it in an envelope, which I gave to my friend Jake with instructions to play it only if Matthew pulled exactly what I was expecting. The party started beautifully. Our backyard was decorated with purple and white balloons, Northwestern's colors, and Mom had ordered a custom cake with my graduation photo. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, and my college roommates all gathered to celebrate my achievement. For the first 2 hours, I actually felt like the guest of honor at my own party. Dad gave a wonderful speech about how proud he was of my academic achievements and my new job offer. He talked about watching me work hard throughout college, managing a part-time job while maintaining perfect grades, and how excited he was to see what I would accomplish in my career. Mom wiped away tears as she talked about how grateful she was to have such a determined and successful daughter. I felt genuinely celebrated for the first time in years. Matthew played his part perfectly during the speeches, smiling and clapping and even raising his glass in a toast to my success. He hugged me afterward and whispered that he was proud of me, and for a moment, I almost felt guilty about what I was expecting him to do. Maybe I had been wrong about him. Maybe he really had grown up and moved past his need to be the center of attention. Then, about 20 minutes after the speeches ended, just as people were settling into conversations and the focus was naturally shifting away from the formal celebration, Matthew made his move. He approached our parents, who were talking with my Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob near the dessert table, and asked if he could speak with them privately for a moment. I watched from across the yard as the three of them moved to a quieter corner of the deck. Within minutes, I could see Mom's expression changing from relaxed enjoyment to concern, then to horror. Dad's face went through a similar transformation, and Uncle Bob noticed the shift in mood and started looking worried too. Matthew was speaking in low, urgent tones, occasionally gesturing in my direction, and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. My stomach knotted as I realized the show was beginning right on schedule. I caught Jake's eye across the yard and nodded slightly. He understood immediately and started making his way toward the house to retrieve the envelope I'd given him earlier. Other family members began to notice that something was wrong, and conversations started quieting as people turned their attention toward the drama unfolding on the deck. Matthew's voice began to rise just enough for nearby people to hear fragments of what he was saying. "Years of this, can't take it anymore, stealing from me, thought you should know." Mom gasped audibly and put her hand over her mouth. Dad's face darkened with anger, and he started looking around the party until his eyes found me. The moment I had been dreading and anticipating for months was finally happening. I could see Matthew wiping tears from his eyes as he continued his performance, occasionally pointing in my direction while our parents' expressions grew more horrified. Other family members started gathering around, drawn by the obvious distress of the conversation. Finally, Dad's voice boomed across the yard. "Everyone, I'm sorry, but we need to pause the celebration for a moment. There's been a serious family matter brought to our attention, and we need to address it immediately." The entire party fell silent, 40 people turning their attention toward what was clearly about to become a very uncomfortable confrontation. Matthew stepped forward, tears streaming down his face, his voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I'm sorry to ruin your party, everyone, but I can't stay quiet about this anymore. For the past 4 years, while we've all been celebrating how successful and responsible my sister is, she's been stealing money from my college fund to pay for her expenses." The gasps from the crowd were audible. Mom was crying openly, Dad looked like he wanted to murder someone, and I could feel 40 pairs of eyes boring into me with a mixture of shock and disgust. Matthew continued, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his performance. "I trusted her when she offered to help me manage my financial aid paperwork freshman year. I gave her access to my accounts because she said she was better with that stuff than I was. But then I started noticing that money was disappearing. Small amounts at first, just a few $100s here and there, but over 4 years, it's been thousands. I've been working 2 part-time jobs and barely sleeping, thinking I was just bad with money, thinking I was failing somehow. Meanwhile, she's been living comfortably off what she stole from me." The performance was masterful. Matthew had tears, genuine seeming emotion, specific details that sounded plausible, and a narrative that painted me as a calculating thief who had betrayed his trust while maintaining a facade of academic excellence. He even pulled out his phone to show bank statements that supposedly proved his claims. Mom turned to me with tears streaming down her face. Is this true? Please tell me this isn't true. Dad's voice was cold with rage. How could you steal from your own brother? How could you let us praise you for achievements you bought with stolen money? I could hear murmurs from the crowd, people I had known my entire life now looking at me like I was a stranger, a criminal, a sociopath. Matthew wasn't finished. The worst part is that I kept making excuses for her in my head. I kept thinking maybe it was mistakes, maybe there were explanations. But when I finally worked up the courage to ask her about it last month, she denied everything and made me feel crazy for even suggesting it. She's been gaslighting me for years, making me doubt my own reality. That's when Jake appeared at my side with the envelope. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting for my response to Matthew's devastating accusations. Some people were already starting to gather their things, clearly uncomfortable with being present for such an ugly family confrontation. My graduation party was effectively over, transformed into a public shaming session where I was the villain of the story. I looked at Matthew, who was still crying and being comforted by Mom and several relatives, and I felt that familiar cold calculation settle over me. Before I respond to these accusations, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, there's something I'd like everyone to see. I took the envelope from Jake and opened it, retrieving my phone. 3 hours ago, before this party began, I recorded a video predicting exactly what would happen today. I'd like everyone to watch it before we continue this conversation. Matthew's crying stopped abruptly, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been fear cross his face. I connected my phone to the outdoor speaker system Dad had set up for the party, and my voice filled the backyard. It's 2:30 p.m. on Saturday, May 15th, 3 hours before my graduation party begins. I'm recording this because I know my brother Matthew is going to try to sabotage my celebration, just like he's sabotaged every important moment of my life for the past 22 years. The crowd went silent. Matthew went pale. Mom and Dad looked confused, but I could see understanding starting to dawn in their expressions. My recorded voice continued, Matthew has developed a pattern of creating emotional crises whenever attention focuses on my achievements. Today, I predict he will wait until after the speeches, when people are relaxed and celebrating, and then he'll approach our parents with some kind of devastating revelation about me. Based on his previous tactics, he'll either accuse me of being cruel to him in private, claim I've betrayed him in some significant way, or fabricate some struggle he's been hiding that requires immediate intervention. The accusation will be specific enough to sound credible, emotional enough to generate sympathy, and timed perfectly to destroy my moment of celebration. The backyard was so quiet I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. Matthew was no longer crying. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between panic and rage. Mom and Dad were looking back and forth between the phone and Matthew, and I could see the wheels turning in their minds as they processed what they were hearing. My recorded voice wasn't finished. Matthew has been manipulating our family dynamics for over 20 years, using fake emotional crises to maintain his position as the primary focus of parental attention. Every time I achieve something noteworthy, he manufactures a crisis that redirects all attention away from my success and onto his manufactured problems. I paused the recording and looked directly at Matthew. Would you like to tell everyone what you accused me of, or should I let them hear the rest of the video where I predicted you'd claim I was stealing money from you? Matthew opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, he was speechless. The money accusation was my second guess, I continued, restarting the recording. If he goes with the theft angle, he'll claim I had access to his financial accounts and have been stealing from him for years. He'll have bank statements that seem to support his story, he'll talk about working extra jobs to compensate, and he'll say I gaslight him when he tried to confront me about it. Dad's face was changing from anger at me to confusion about Matthew. How could you know? He started to say, but I held up my hand and let the recording continue. The bank statements will be real, but the missing money went to his girlfriend Emma's shopping habits and his weekend trips to Vegas with his fraternity brothers. I have documentation of his actual spending patterns that prove where the money really went. I stopped the recording and pulled up my photo gallery, scrolling to a folder labeled Matthew Documentation. For the past 2 years, I've been systematically documenting Matthew's manipulation tactics and his actual behavior patterns. Jake, my roommate Angela, and I have been collecting evidence because I knew a day like today would eventually come. The first photo I showed was a screenshot of Matthew's Venmo payments to Emma, hundreds of dollars for shopping trips, expensive dinners, and weekend getaways. The dates corresponded exactly with when money had supposedly been stolen from his account. "Here's where his money actually went," I announced. "Not stolen by me, but freely spent on his girlfriend and his social life." Matthew finally found his voice. "Those are fake. She made those up." But his protest sounded weak and desperate, especially when I scrolled to the next set of evidence. These are photos from his Instagram account, posted on the same weekends he claimed to be working extra shifts to make up for stolen money. The photos showed Matthew at expensive restaurants, beach trips, concerts, and parties, clearly living well above the means of someone who was supposedly struggling financially. Uncle Bob whistled softly and said, "Those don't look like the activities of someone who's been robbed by his sister." "Wait, there's more," I said, scrolling to a video file. This is security footage from the casino in Atlantic City, dated last month, showing Matthew gambling away over $800 in one night. The same night he called our parents crying about how stressed he was about his financial situation. The video was grainy but clear enough to identify Matthew at a blackjack table, laughing and ordering drinks while consistently betting far more than someone with legitimate financial problems would risk. Mom gasped and put her hand over her mouth again, but this time she was looking at Matthew instead of me. "And this," I said, playing an audio recording, "is a conversation between Matthew and his friend Tyler from 2 weeks ago, recorded when Tyler called while Matthew was in my room borrowing my laptop." Matthew's voice came through the speaker clearly. "The best part about the sister thing is that I can always make everything about me if I need to. Watch this. When she graduates next week, I'm going to drop some major drama right in the middle of her party. I'm thinking maybe I'll say she's been stealing from me or something. Our parents will lose their minds, and suddenly her big day becomes all about poor Matthew again." Tyler's laughter came through the recording. "Dude, that's genius. You've had them wrapped around your finger your whole life." Matthew responded, "It's not even hard. They still feel guilty about my birth complications, so they'll believe anything that makes them think they need to protect me from my successful twin sister. I could probably convince them she was trying to poison me, and they'd believe it." The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew looked around the crowd desperately, but every face reflected the same expression: disgust, disappointment, and dawning understanding. Mom was staring at him like she'd never seen him before, tears streaming down her face for entirely different reasons now. 22 years, Dad said quietly, his voice heavy with disbelief. 22 years of believing, worrying, defending you, making excuses for you, prioritizing your needs over your sister's achievements. He turned to look at me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before: guilt, recognition, and what might have been respect. "How long have you known?" Mom asked me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Consciously? About 2 years. Subconsciously? Probably my whole life. But I needed proof because I knew nobody would believe me without it. Matthew is very, very good at what he does." Aunt Linda spoke up from the crowd. "All those times you had breakdowns right after your sister's achievements." Matthew tried to interrupt. "I can explain all of this," but Dad cut him off with a gesture that could have stopped traffic. "No," Dad said firmly. "You've done enough explaining for one lifetime. 22 years of fake explanations, manufactured crises, and emotional manipulation." He turned to address the entire party. "I owe everyone here an apology, but especially my daughter. We've allowed Matthew to hijack every celebration, every achievement, every moment that should have been about recognizing her hard work and success." "But most importantly," Mom said, walking over to me with tears in her eyes. "We owe you the biggest apology of all. We failed you as parents. We allowed your brother to manipulate us into neglecting you, dismissing your feelings, and minimizing your accomplishments. We made you responsible for managing his emotions instead of holding him accountable for his behavior." Matthew made one last desperate attempt. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under, having a perfect sister who makes everything look so easy." But Uncle Bob interrupted him. "Cut the crap, Matthew. We all heard the recordings. We all saw the evidence. The only pressure you've been under is the pressure of maintaining your lies." I looked around at the faces of my family and friends, seeing recognition, understanding, and something I'd rarely experienced in my life: genuine support for me instead of sympathy for Matthew. My graduation party had been ruined, but in its place, something more valuable had emerged: the truth. "I'm going inside," Matthew said quietly, finally abandoning his performance entirely. "This is all over. I finished for him." "Yes, it is. Your show is finally over, and you don't get to be the star anymore." As Matthew walked toward the house with slumped shoulders and no audience left to perform for, Dad put his arm around me. "I don't know how to make up for 22 years of getting this wrong," he said, "but I'd like to try, starting with finishing your graduation celebration the way it should have been from the beginning." The party resumed, but it was different now. People weren't just congratulating me on my degree, they were acknowledging years of achievements that had been overshadowed by Matthew's manipulation. Conversations flowed freely without the underlying tension of waiting for the next emotional crisis. For the first time in my adult life, I was the center of positive attention at a family gathering, and it felt incredible. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the decorations had been taken down, Mom and Dad sat me down for the conversation I'd been waiting my entire life to have. They acknowledged the patterns they'd enabled, the achievements of mine they'd minimized, and the emotional responsibility they'd inappropriately placed on me. They promised to seek family therapy and committed to rebuilding our relationship based on honesty instead of emotional manipulation. Matthew spent the next week trying various approaches to regain his position: tearful apologies, promises to change, claims that I had misunderstood his motivations, and attempts to convince our parents that his manipulation was actually a cry for help that deserved sympathy rather than consequences. None of it worked. The evidence was too comprehensive, the pattern too clear, and our parents' understanding too complete. 6 months later, Matthew is in therapy working on legitimate emotional issues for the first time in his life, while I'm thriving in my new job in Chicago, finally free from the exhausting dynamic that had defined our family for over 2 decades. My parents and I have rebuilt our relationship based on mutual respect and genuine communication, and I've learned to celebrate my achievements without constantly bracing for manufactured crises. Sometimes the truth really does set you free, even when it takes 22 years and a recording device to finally reveal it. The best revenge isn't always getting even. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let someone else's lies define your reality anymore. Matthew spent years stealing my moments of joy, but he can't steal my future, and that makes all the documentation and planning worth it. The truth has a way of eventually surfacing, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. And when it does, the freedom that follows is sweeter than any revenge could ever be.
What did you think of the systematic takedown of her manipulative twin brother? Subscribe to Family Stories Daily for more jaw-dropping family betrayal stories, and tell us about your own toxic sibling experiences in the comments below.